Thanks for tuning in to the Woodcraft store in San Carlos. We're going to be working with Frank, one of our instructors at the store, along with Claude. And they are going to be learning about and teaching us how to do some resin pours. We always like to start off small, so we're starting off with this small slab here. We've got to cut that down the middle. The middle cut will then become our outside cuts. We're going to take that and join it. Square it all up, and then of course run it through the planer and get it flat. And you want to square up the ends. It's pretty straightforward at this point in time, not too tricky, just trying to make a square on the outside so that you can build your bathtub, and that's what we're doing here with melamine. This was the first go round. You can see we decided to do pocket holes. You got to caulk it. You're essentially making a bathtub. We'll talk in a minute. Pocket holes turned out not to be as preferable to what we used in the second unit. Again, got to caulk the bottoms, the edges, the whole bit there to keep it nice and tight. Watertight, resin epoxy tight. You can see we marked the length on that one, put that in place, and then screw it in. Make sure it's square. What we found with the pocket screws is that it pulled, and so the outside of that bathtub that we're making there had a little bit of a lean to it. So we decided to come up from the bottom. But it still worked. So there you go. And again, lots of caulking, and it's got to be level, obviously. First thing you do, mirror coat, System 3 mirror coat. Mix it very, very well according to the directions. And then you're going to hit the interior portion of your slab where the epoxy is going to go. Mirror coat is going to help or prevent bubbles from air coming out of the wood into the resin. If you don't do this, you're going to get bubbles all along that wood, and that's not what you want to do. Then you want to hit the rest of it with shellac. Spraying stoner inside the pouring tub helps it break free when you're done. We need to scrape off all the excess mirror coat that rolled down the side there, and then you want to give a little scuff to the mirror coat, so it accepts the resin very well when it gets poured. Now we're going to put a line of caulking across the bottom. Just going to fold this down again. We're trying to create not only a bathtub inside the melamine, but you want to really keep as much of the resin between those two boards as possible. So we sealed around. Here we're trying to estimate how much we actually need to do. If you take 10 measurements of the distance between those two boards, then divide by 10, that's your average. Multiply by the length and the depth, and that will give you cubic inches. And then you go to your phone and go to Google and say, I need to convert cubic inches into fluid ounces. And then you take the fluid ounces and go to your product that you're using. In this case, we're using System 3 Rivercast. And it actually, calculation came in pretty close, so we were happy with that. But that's how you do the calculation. Okay, now we've got everything clamped down. Those boards will try and float. You can see we've got the caulking on the ends down there. Again, to keep all the resin in between here. This resin is extremely expensive, so we want to keep it only where we want it. If we let it fly all over the place, we're going to use a lot more. Again, the Rivercast. And we marked, you can see where we marked there on the cups, measuring cups. And then you start to mix.
I don't think it'll hurt.
And you mix, and you mix, and you want to get everything possible into one container. Again, it's a reaction between the A and the B side, and if you lose some to the inside of a cup, then your formula is going to be off. So we scraped and scraped and scraped and got as much as we could possible, and even off the stick. And then we got our paint mixer in there, and mixed and mixed and mixed. Okay. Now we're starting to color it, you can see. And we have the tint in there. We're going for a blue, just a little bit of blue. Trying not to over blue it. We'd like to be able to see some depth and see what's going on in the resin. So we're slowly mixing it in. It's not, you know, there it turned pretty good. So that's probably where we stopped. The one question we wanted to try and answer was, well, what's the depth of it going to look like? So that cup there represents the depth of the table. So we thought, oh, well, that's going to be the color. The one thing that we didn't account for was that it's all dark on the side where the wood's at. Here we're starting to put in some powder, and we put powder in then and mixed it in. Another thing we learned is mix all the powder in that cup, because you'll see here in a minute, we pour it in. We're trying not to over pour, trying to watch for any leaks. We didn't have any. That worked out well for us. Now you can see we're trying to put more powder in. And it's going to work out for the most part, but you can't mix it as well. And so you end up with these little kind of like dry chunks in a pancake batter. That's not really good. You'll see in a minute what happened to that. But we wanted to get a little bit more of that in there and stir it up. And as it sits in there, you want to watch for bubbles that come up. Hit it with a heat gun and try and make sure none of those bubbles stick around. We did come back a couple times as it was setting up and give it a little bit more stir, because you can see there's some detail sort of suspended in the resin epoxy that is a really cool effect. But the more that it sits there, the more it starts to settle out. So we came back a couple times. And again, this is really the wrong place to be putting the powder in, and I'll show you in a minute why. But it's a very, very cool effect. We really enjoyed this on the small scale, and would recommend, if you like the look of it, this is how you do it. It's pretty cool. But again, everything's clamped down. We didn't have any leaks coming out that we could see at this point in time, and we'll see that later as well. Keep it level. Should be in good shape. All right, here it's hardened up. Oh, we had a little extra. We poured a pen blank and a couple of little coasters or different shaped that we had. And you can see those are a lot lighter because it's a lot thinner. Okay, it's all set up here. We're taking all the clamps off. And it's looking pretty good. Oh, that one's stuck. So the epoxy must have gotten up there somehow and glued that board down. It's just a sacrificial board though. We were eventually able to pop these out. We're trying to figure out what the best approach is without digging into the wood too much, but it'll come off. There it goes. And the other one didn't stick as well. So it looks like it just leaked out or came out to the other side. How that happened, we don't quite understand, because it was level and it didn't do it earlier. Maybe in the curing process it expanded a little bit. So we thought we had a chance to maybe reuse this bathtub melamine type thing if we popped it off and then set it back on. But it pulled the finish right off, and there's no way we could reuse that again. So when you are able to get it up off the board and you can see the back, then you start to learn how and where the leak probably happened. There we go. We get to look at the back, flip it over, and you can see it leaked around on the two edges over there. But it doesn't appear to have gotten past our caulking. So it must have gone out and around. But it wasn't too much. We didn't lose a lot of material, so that's good. And again, because we put the shellac on there, it protects the wood, and we can sand it off and
do this, right?
be back to our natural wood. Here, those little light blue spots that you see are the solids that never got mixed up properly the first time and settled to the bottom. So that's what we want to avoid. Here's what it ended up looking like after we got it all sanded down and polished up. We'll show you a little bit more about that on a second unit. But the color suspension there is the thing I really like to point out. It's a very cool effect. If you're looking for something like that, this is how you do it. And I do encourage you to do a little sample, small scale sample, and keep your formula in mind when you try and expand it. Because once you get it up full size, you don't get a lot of choices. You can't fix it at that point in time. So anyway, we put some hairpin legs on it. It's going to be a nice display piece. All right, now we're going to go full size. Now that we learned a lot from that first one, first thing you got to do with your slab is get the bark off.
It does.
Okay, I'll try.
Then we drew some lines down the middle. You can see we've got a split on one end and an issue on the other. So we're actually going to cut about an inch and a half out of the middle there. So we end up with our two outside edges relatively straight, and we can eliminate those problem areas at the same time. So we cut both those off. There is a good sized check there that's just going by. We can fill that. We did fill that with resin epoxy. It's pretty cool. So after you get the bark off, we're going to smooth that down a little bit, clean that up. Now we're just sort of trying to estimate. I think we ended up taking another shaving off of one side here on the one on the right to try and get things lined up right. Trying to imagine how this is going to look, and we figured we were pretty close. So mirror coat, again, same thing. Got to seal those edges so that bubbles don't come out. And then I think we had to send these out to get them planed down. We hit the forms with shellac as well to keep those sealed up. And again, we're doing the same math. I think we might have had 17 measurements or something like that on this one. And again, just find the average, multiply by the depth. I think ours was 2 1/4 inches deep. And the length was 51 inches, and that gives you cubic inches. And then again, go to your Google search and search for the calculator. Again, the shellac to protect the wood from any stain rollover from the resin. This one, the client wanted to go with red, and what I want you to see here is we put very little red in there, and see how dark that got?
That was like
You need to be careful.
one tiny
Some
drop.
colors go
Okay.
a lot darker, a lot faster than others.
Well,
I don't think
And
that's
we'll
what we
see how
wanted.
this turns out. The client was looking for a very subtle red, so it worked out for them. And here, again, instead of the pocket holes, we're screwing up from the bottom. It's pulling the forms straight down. Again, sealing the edges, creating that bathtub. And that's just a latex caulking. Nothing special there. Hit it with the stoner again. That'll keep it, help it break free from the melamine after it's sat. The only thing we did differently this time is we pulled that line maybe another inch in. What we found the first time is when we pushed it down, it squeezed out into where we were going to end up putting the resin. It was harder to clean that up. And we squish it down there, keep it nice and sealed. Same thing with the other side. Fences are set. This one we assembled the bathtub as we went so that we could really snug those in, put them in place where we wanted them. And really got it caulking in all the little spots there. I think the one major fail point is that bottom edge. We're pushing down on the slab. We've got clamps pushing it in. So the flat spot seems to do really well. But forgot to do the outside corners. But that corner, I think, is where it fails. Internal. We didn't have anything leak out. So here we've clamped it down in 4 different spots, thinking that was going to be enough. and really gave it a good vacuum on the inside and cleaned out all the excess caulking and anything like that. Here's our big bucket of Rivercast again, in the red this time. Poured that in there. You can see a lot of air bubbles in there. We're going to be dealing with those in a moment. This is the moment of truth. Because once you pour it, that's it.
Keep going. Oh yeah.
That looks great.
And again, our math worked out fairly well.
Calculation correct.
We didn't have a lot left over. You don't want to use any extra of this if you don't have to. It's very expensive. Phenomenal product, but it's expensive.
Move this side up, put a shim underneath on this side.
So, we're giving a little stir, trying to get all the extra air bubbles out at the bottom, and make sure the color is nice and mixed. Behind you there, I think Frank's got the heat gun. You can see that, hitting all those bubbles as it comes up. You see we added a clamp here. We were having some big air bubbles come up from underneath in that, only on that one spot. So we figured maybe there was a, instead of a leak, there was an air bubble down there. So we pushed down on it. A bunch of air bubbles came up and then they stopped. So I think we solved that problem. We'll see here in a moment when we pop this off. Again, you can see where it flowed up a little on this one end down here. And we don't know exactly how that happened. And it's a little low on this end closest to us over here. It didn't move. Well, it sat for a week. It sat for a week while it set up and cured. So, not sure if it's part of the curing process or what's going on. Anyway, we still have plenty of material to work with. And it held on so well, we broke the melamine. But it'll pop off here in a sec. Here's where we started finding the leaking happening at that edge. And we learned that to fix that, you need to let your pouring tub set up overnight and let that caulking come to a full dry. That edge is the danger zone and where it leaks around. So if you let it set up overnight and then pour the next day. And then we were pointing out where we found the air bubbles that were popping up from the bottom, and by clamping it down, I think we squished them all out. So it was good to go. So you can scrape off all the caulking and any excess that you can. And we had a friend with a cabinet shop with this monster of a belt sander, 42 inches wide, glorious piece of equipment. We sanded this thing down in 20-30 passes in about 35 minutes, and we were done if we'd had to do it. The table, this particular top is 19.5 inches wide. Our drum sander is 18 inches wide, so we would have had to have done it twice for each side. And when we talked with him, he's like, sure, bring it on over. Here we're just using the fest tool to cut the end off, square it up. Looking good. Go do the other end. And we're just going to make sure it's all nice and square. Nothing really too special about this process as regards to the resin. It cuts and sands fairly similarly. There's a few special things you have to do with it, but at this point in time. Now we start our sanding process. On the wood material, we take it to 220. On the epoxy resin half, we did 320, 400, 1000 to smooth that out a little bit differently before we start the polishing. In a moment here, we'll show you how we do that. And the resin as well. Here we're filling in a small air bubble that we found. And he's just picking it clean because there's a little bit of dust in there, and then he's making sure the CA glue gets down in there to try and get all the dust out so we don't have an air bubble on top of it. I think that was the only one. There may have been one other, but that's how you do that. Hut Extra Gloss plastic polish is what you use, and we use a buffing pad, Surbuff product, on your resin epoxy to start polishing your resin epoxy. ideally, you would only put the polish on the resin epoxy, but because you've got such an odd size there, you've got to make it work. And you'll see here in a moment, we come back and clean up the wood edge a little bit. It's looking good. There we are. Sanding right up to the edge there, so we can treat the wood a little differently than you treat resin. Alright, that's sort of our near finished product. We put a little eased edge on it there. Again, you see the white resin flake out there. Now you're going to come back and clean that up as well. Not a problem. Putting a final sand on it. And the final polish on the resin. Once you ease that edge on the resin, you've got to go back and polish it as well. Here we're going to do shellac, and we're going to pop the color, which is just phenomenal. Look at that. All right, the one thing we learned from this, another thing we learned from this, is to keep the shellac on the wood. We may have ended up with a bit of an issue with the shellac on the resin. We're working that out. Tried and True is the other finish we're going to use on this. As you can see on the resin there, we've got a little left over, but we polished that out in the end fairly well. We didn't notice any issues with the Tried and True on the resin. And you just get a bunch of this stuff on there and let it sit.
The feel of this stuff when you're done is
Just
amazing.
gorgeous colors coming out in the grain. Ironically, at this point in time, the grain on the what we thought was going to be the bottom,
Doing it here, not at home.
after it popped, looked better than the grain on the top. So we ended up using what we thought was going to be the bottom as the top.
Come on over here.
I think they did 6, 7, 8 coats of the Tried and True. I believe it's you put it on, and then 20 minutes later you come back, and we'll show you that here in a minute, and wipe it off and let it sit for 4 to 6 hours. And you come back and do this process again.
Is that about right? 20 minutes? Okay. Now, how does this compare with True Oil? Because True Oil is kind of that same process, right?
Totally different. Totally different. True Oil point where there's nothing.
All right, you polish it until there's nothing on your rag.
Good.
And then coat
And
after
then you
coat
do it
after
again.
coat should take care of
Again and
anything
again.
that you can see on
Yeah,
the
see, we're
epoxy.
checking out those issues on the resin. We end up fixing that.
We shall see.
But we think it was caused by the shellac, so
No, I
try
can
and
put
keep
some
your
wax
shellac
on it.
off of there.
Regular wax. But you gotta get all of that stuff off. And now it sits.
All right, we put the legs on, and that should bring this little project to a close. Thanks for watching, everybody. Glad you've stuck with us to this point. You can see the finished product here standing up on its own. We want to thank you for watching and hanging out with us while we learned ourselves a little bit here. We also want to send a big thank you to Systems 3 for providing the Rivercast for this demonstration, and we love how the uplighting really comes through with this project. Thanks!